All right, and let's take some questions now from our viewers. And we'll start with one from Amanda Vasquez, who asks, did the original treaty have any enforcement mechanism in case one side violated its terms? James, you're nodding furiously.
Yeah, so I mean, the treaty did have an inspections mechanism that lasted for quite a while, but it did expire. I think it was 2001, is that right, Michaela? Yeah. I can't, some of the details of treaties, or even for experts, it's we don't always remember. But yeah, so it did. But that was one thing about the INF treaty. It did have expired enforcement mechanisms, which is different than New START, for example, which is continuous.
Okay. And our next question comes from Ira Jones, who asks, how likely are Trump and Putin to sign a meaningful arms reduction treaty? Now, we touched on it a little bit earlier, but Michaela, your thoughts?
I think pretty unlikely if the INF treaty remains in force. I think if INF treaty goes away and the United States takes steps along the ground-launched missile developments and such, ultimately the United States will be in a stronger negotiating position, kind of like what we've seen with the Pershing IIs in Europe in the 1980s. It wasn't until the United States started to deploy these systems that the Russians, or back then the Soviets, started to seriously consider zero option that ultimately prevailed in the INF treaty.
Okay, and now it's time for Answer This, where each guest asks a question directly to the other. So who would like to go first?
I'd like to ask you, James, in your opinion, when is the time that you know that we've exhausted all the options and that it's the right step to withdraw from a treaty?
Right. That's a great question, because you know my answer. I don't know. And I think you could have asked the Trump administration this 2 years ago, and they wouldn't have had the answer that would have been, we're going to withdraw in February or January and then be out in August. But I will say that I don't think this is the right time, as I mentioned before, and I've sort of gone into that. But I want to ask you a question, actually, if that's okay. And,
sure.
And the question that I have is about China, because it's been interesting to me. A lot of analysts, we debate this stuff all the time. But you didn't bring up China at all, which has been one of the core arguments of the Trump administration. So my question comes down to this. If Russia came back into compliance, if all of the 9 M729s were verifiably eliminated, would you support the U.S. staying in the treaty?
I don't think that we would have withdrawn from the INF treaty if the Russians did not violate it.
But now that we have withdrawn, there's about 5.5 months until we actually withdraw, because the treaty has a 6-month withdrawal clause. If they eliminated everything, would you support the United States going back into the treaty?
I think I would, actually. Yeah.
Okay.